You know what season it is, right? In fact, the season that it's been for some time now, right? Yes, you know what it is. It is Hallmark Christmas movie season. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you that I am not here to issue any sort of criticism to those movies. And if you're someone who loves to watch them, more power to you. There are people who absolutely cannot wait for Hallmark Christmas movie season to begin. And I think what makes these movies so very lovable, so watchable, could be the fact that you do have a pretty good idea where the story is going to go, even as those opening credits are rolling. And that's a good thing, right? Because in these days, it is so hard to land on anything that is predictable. And so, yes, a really good rom-com under the Hallmark brand. It offers that safe landing spot in the midst of so much stuff that is going on around us the rest of the time. Now, there are a few things, that you will find in almost every, if not every, Hallmark Christmas movie. First of all, the story tends to revolve around the women, and one writer said, these are not boy meets girl stories, these are girl meets boy stories. The woman at the heart of the story usually has a pretty good white-collar job, and she may not know it at the very beginning of the movie, but in all likelihood, her job is not making her happy. In fact, she's probably inflicting some sort of moral damage on herself because of her work. And so she goes home for Christmas. Or she travels to a small town for Christmas as an escape, or she suffers some sort of turn of events that leaves her stranded in a small town at Christmas time. You get the idea. And then she meets someone. It's usually a good-looking, blue-collar type of person. Cute, but certainly the two of them do not get along at all. And so conflict follows, as it will. And it will eventually be resolved through the elements of romance and tradition and miracles and, of course, all things Christmas, right? Now, if we don't look carefully, we could easily write off this book that we have been working our way through for the past few weeks, the book of Ruth, as a script for another Hallmark-style movie. The story begins in a small town in Bethlehem. Naomi leaves. She goes with her family to a place that she does not know, but where she expects that life is going to be better. And yes, it would seem as if she has found everything that she needed in Moab, but it turns out to not be all that she expected. Maybe not in a Hallmark style of way, in a more tragic way. She loses her husband and her 2 sons to death. And so she prepares to make her return to her small town of Bethlehem, but she is going to come home as a broken and bitter woman. And this is where Ruth really enters the story. We'll recall that she is Naomi's daughter-in-law. She was married to one of Naomi's sons who died. And she chooses to embrace Naomi's faith, and she goes with her to Bethlehem, and very soon she is the one who meets Boaz. Now again, we're going to deviate a little bit from the Hallmark elements of the story that don't quite fit, because it seems that Boaz is not a young person. Some have suggested he wasn't even handsome, nor was he secretly rich. But Boaz emerges as the one who will provide a way for both Ruth and Naomi's security and happiness. And with a bit of negotiating, he steps forward as the distant relative who must not only marry Ruth out of obligation, but take both she and Naomi under his care. And it turns out that he really wants to do that. Boaz shows up as a good man, one who wants to do what is right, and he's pretty happy about getting this girl from the faraway land. And so here's how the book of Ruth wraps up. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and when they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more than 7 sons, has borne him." And then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed, and he became the father of Jesse, the father of David. All right, see? Just like a Hallmark movie. We even get a little Christmas in this story. The book ends by pointing us toward the place where we are going next, straight on to Christmas. Ruth and Boaz's son is the great-grandfather of David, who would become the king of Israel and who would become one of the ancestors of Jesus, who would be born in Bethlehem, where the story began. So cue the pretty music, and the camera shows us a happy mother, a father, a grandmother, and a baby who are setting us up for just a few more sequels. It's all so perfect, isn't it? But is it perfect because it's written well and it fits a script, or is it perfect for another reason? Now, we have noted throughout our time in the book of Ruth that this is a story where God is known but not really seen. God is not actually hanging out in the background, but God is just there. There are people, some of the minor characters in the story, who are providing some very important elements. And they're doing what God has long instructed them to do, to take compassion on those who are in need, those who grieve, to provide resources for those who are without, and to offer welcome to those who come from other places, who don't belong in the small town of Bethlehem, but are loved by God nonetheless. And so there are no signs and wonders, but just everyday salt of the earth people who are offering kindness to those who are hurting and wandering and lost. Now, we might look at this story of Naomi and Ruth and Boaz and say, you know what, this is all just a little too perfect. Because we know, don't we, that life doesn't always play out this way. Sometimes the pain remains for some too long. Sometimes we wander without knowing where we are going, and sometimes we stay lost, feeling as if we are never, ever going to be able to find our way home. But as we consider this story, we can remember that this and so many of the stories from our Bible offers us a way to just see how God moves. You see, when we dig in, when we explore the stories of our faith, we can better understand God's character and all that God desires for us in our world. And we realize that we don't always need the big moments, the big pronouncements, the great battles, the astounding miracles. Sometimes, in fact, most times, what we need is to just take in the stories of God and God's people. And in those stories, we can see how God speaks the world into existence. We can remember that at Christmas, Jesus came to us as God's Word made flesh. And we can see once again that God is always reaching out to the world and offering a way home, a way toward redemption. The novel Lessons in Chemistry has been made into a series that's showing now on Apple TV. And I enjoyed the book, and I'll tell you, I might be appreciating the series even a little bit more. One of the themes running through the story is a question about whether science and faith have anything to do with one another and whether faith is even necessary. I would say that the book of Ruth offers us a reminder that our faith does not come from a series of hypotheses or conditions that are waiting for us to either prove them or disprove them. I would say that our faith begins with the story, the story of God's constant interactions with our world, and that when we spend time with these stories, not just giving them a quick read, but really letting them push us and speak to us and ask us questions, and then revealing to us just a little bit more of what God is to us, that is when we can take another step toward home. We can begin to look for those reminders of what God has done, what God has made possible, and what God is seeking to do in the here and the now. We let our faith guide our steps. Faith that reminds us that Naomi turned toward home when she heard there was a rumor that once again there was food in Bethlehem. Faith that shows us even the little nugget that the word Bethlehem, the name Bethlehem, means house of bread. And that one day the one who would be known to us as the bread of life would be born in that town. Faith that shows us how a woman overcome by grief was still welcomed home and not pushed aside. Even in her sorrow and bitterness, another person, in fact, an entire community stood by her side. But Ruth was this living promise that Naomi would never be left alone, just as God had promised. The hope remains because they have now come to the house of bread. They're there at the beginning of the barley harvest. And it is in this place that they will not only find food, but they will find the compassion of others, a welcome home that perhaps neither of them thought was fully possible. One of the characters in that series, in that novel, Lessons in Chemistry, is a dog who believes that he has failed to take care of the people as he was supposed to. And we hear his voice throughout one section of the story, when he says that he finds comfort in being able to turn away from his sadness and face what he had done. He acknowledges the grief and our readiness sometimes to just dive into it and let the world pass us by. And then he wonders why so often it is that our failures are the things that are most memorable. But then in this particularly sweet moment, almost in a Hallmark movie kind of way, he asks this question: what can you say to someone who has lost everything? And then he continues, that's when it came to me, this thing that Calvin used to say when we would get tired of running, that the beauty of running is this, that when you don't think you can move forward, that's when you move forward. When you are sad about your yesterdays and when you're not sure about tomorrow, your purpose is just being there, putting one foot in front of the other. 1 foot, 1 foot, 1 foot. That's all you have to think about.